the elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and nobody looked up. That was the first warning, not the silence. Corporate silence is normal. In executive offices, silence usually means somebody important is pretending not to panic. This silence was different. It had weight. It sat in the glass walls, in the polished marble floor, in the way the receptionist smiled at me like she had been instructed to use exactly 6 teeth and no more. My access badge still worked. That was the second warning. If a company wants to fire you cleanly, they usually turn off your access before you arrive, because nothing says professional transition like making a grown adult explain themselves to a security guard at 8:11 in the morning. But my badge blinked green. The gate opened, and that meant they wanted me upstairs. They wanted me to walk in myself. They wanted the little ceremony, the quiet humiliation, the controlled room with water glasses nobody drinks from, the HR folder already printed, the legal observer pretending to check emails, the executive who calls you valued right before deleting your career from the org chart. I stepped through the glass doors of Meridian Arc Systems, smiled at the receptionist, and said, "Morning, Lila." She looked down at her keyboard too quickly. "Morning, Nadia." There it was. Not Ms. Vale, not Nadia with the warm tone she used when she wanted gossip. Just my name, soft and careful, like it might crack if she said it too loudly. Behind her, the executive corridor was unusually clean. No interns rushing with coffee, no analysts whispering into headsets. No one from finance trying to pretend their spreadsheet wasn't on fire. Just stillness. At the far end of the hallway, the boardroom lights were already on. That was the third warning. The boardroom was never lit before 9 unless money was arriving, money was leaving. Or someone was about to lie about both. My phone buzzed. A calendar invite had appeared at 8:13 a.m. Mandatory transition discussion. No agenda, no attachments, no dial-in. Attendees, me, Julian Voss, Dana Klein, and Mara Fenwick. Julian Voss was our Chief Executive Officer. Dana Klein was Chief People Officer, which is what companies call HR when they want firings to sound like wellness initiatives. Mara Fenwick was General Counsel. Mara never attended transition discussions unless the transition involved liability. I stared at the invite for a moment, but then I laughed once, quietly, not because it was funny, because 7 months earlier I had predicted the exact room, the exact people, and almost the exact wording. They had changed alignment conversation to transition discussion. That was thoughtful of them. I walked to my office, or what had been my office for the last 4 years. The nameplate was still there. Nadia Vale, Senior Vice President, Strategic Risk Architecture. A title that sounded ridiculous until something expensive broke and everyone remembered I existed. Inside my desk had been touched. Not searched. They were too careful for that. But touched. The framed photo of my father and me at Lake Varon had been moved half an inch to the left. My pen cup had been rotated. My monitor was slightly off-center. One drawer sat closed but not latched. And someone had gone through my office and tried not to look like someone had gone through my office. That was the fourth warning. I set my bag down, opened the drawer. Nothing was missing. Of course nothing was missing. The important documents were not in my office. They were not on my laptop. They were not in my email. They were not in the secure executive drive that somehow allowed 12 vice presidents and 1 summer intern to access confidential acquisition material. The important documents were where adults put important documents, in signed systems, with timestamps, with external copies, with witnesses who wore expensive watches and did not forget dates. My office phone rang. I let it ring twice before answering. "Nadia," Dana said, using the voice HR people use when they want compassion to sound like a corporate asset. "Ma, are you here?" "I am in my office." "Great. Julian would like to meet now." "The meeting is at 8:30. "Yes, we're running a little ahead." I looked at the empty hallway. "You usually need another person's participation to run ahead, Dana." There was a pause, a tiny one, the kind that tells you the script did not include sarcasm. "Julian is ready for you." "I'm sure he is." I hung up, took one slow sip of coffee, and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a slim black notebook. I did not need it. I knew every date, every email, every signature, every meeting, every ignored warning. But I liked the weight of it in my hand. Some people carry lucky coins. I carried minutes, documented minutes. The most dangerous thing in corporate life is not rage. It is a calm person with receipts. I walked to the boardroom. Though through the glass wall, I saw them already seated. Julian at the head of the table, of course. Perfect suit, perfect jaw, perfectly practiced sorrow. Dana sat to his right with a navy folder placed directly in front of her like a ceremonial blade. Mara Fenwick sat near the corner, not looking at anyone. That was new. Mara always looked at everyone. She had the expression of a woman who had just realized the bridge was not on the map because someone had burned it down. There was also a fourth person in the room, Evan Tolliver, Chief Financial Officer. He was not on the calendar invite. That was the fifth warning. Or maybe the first confirmation. Evan only appeared in meetings when numbers were involved, and the number they were trying to avoid paying me was $2.78 million. Not the largest number in the building that morning. Not even close. But it was the number that had made Julian stupid. I opened the door. Everyone looked up at once. Too fast, like actors missing a cue. "Good morning," I said. Julian stood. "Nadia, thank you for coming in on such short notice." "I work here, Julian." Another pause. I took the chair closest to the door. Not because I intended to leave quickly, because I wanted them to think I did. Dana smiled at me with the soft, tragic expression of someone about to weaponize empathy. Mara folded her hands. Evan stared at his tablet like it owed him money. Julian remained standing. That told me he wanted height, dominance, a little theater. He cleared his throat. "Nadia, before we begin, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work you've done for Meridian Arc." That was how I knew they were definitely firing me. Executives only say extraordinary work when they are about to explain why the extraordinary person is no longer required. "For 4 years," he continued, "you have helped build our strategic risk division into something the market recognizes as genuinely innovative." "Careful," I said. "That sounds like something shareholders might read later." Dana blinked. Mara's eyes flicked toward me. Julian gave a thin smile. "We want this conversation to remain respectful." "Then we already agree on one thing." He sat down. "Good." I preferred eye level. He pushed a folder toward Dana. Dana opened it, removed 2 documents, and slid them across the table. I did not touch them. The top page said, "Separation and Mutual Release Agreement." The second page said, "Executive Transition Statement." Mutual Release. Transition Statement. 2 phrases that mean, "I'd please sign away the truth quietly." Julian leaned forward. "After careful review, we've decided to eliminate your role as part of a broader leadership restructuring." I looked around the room. "Broader than what?" Dana answered. "The company is entering a new phase. The board wants a more streamlined executive structure ahead of the bellwether transaction." The bellwether transaction. There it was. Bellwether Capital was preparing to acquire a controlling stake in Meridian Arc Systems for $1.6 billion, assuming our biggest client implementation closed by Friday. That client was Asterion Harbor Group, a private port infrastructure consortium managing cargo terminals across 6 countries. 3 years ago, Asterion had nearly walked away from Meridian Arc after our original risk engine failed a stress test so badly that one of their directors called it a roulette wheel with a dashboard. I was brought in to fix it. I did more than fix it. I rebuilt the whole thing. The platform was called LanternGate. It monitored contract exposure, compliance risk, geopolitical shipping disruptions, port delays, insurance triggers, vendor fraud indicators, and financing covenants across Asterion's global operations. That may sound boring. It was not boring when one port delay could cost $9 million a day. It was not boring when insurers refused to underwrite shipments unless LanternGate signed off. It was not boring when Bellwether Capital valued Meridian Arc at $1.6 billion, largely because Asterion agreed to become our anchor client. LanternGate was the reason the acquisition existed. Asterion was the reason Bellwether cared. And I was the reason Asterion trusted the system. Not because I was charming. I am not charming. I am efficient, suspicious, and very good at reading contracts before arrogant people skim them. Julian continued, "We believe the next phase requires commercial leadership rather than architecture leadership." "Commercial leadership?" I repeated. "Yes." "Is that what we're calling Reese Calder now?" Evan stopped scrolling. Reese Calder was Julian's favorite executive vice president. He had perfect hair, a golf membership, and the technical depth of a motivational calendar. He also wanted my bonus. More accurately, he wanted my milestone credit, which controlled my bonus. All my employment agreement included a deferred performance award tied to Asterian's operational acceptance of Lantern Gate, $2.78 million, payable when the client accepted Phase 3 deployment and the board certified my leadership contribution. The acceptance meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Today was Tuesday. The timing was so obvious it was almost insulting. Julian clasped his hands. Reese will oversee the client transition from here. I nodded. Has Asterian agreed to that? Dana answered before Julian could. Client staffing decisions are internal matters. That was the first truly stupid sentence of the morning. Mara knew it. I saw it in the way her jaw tightened. I leaned back. Internal to whom? Dana's smile held, but only because it had nowhere else to go. To Meridian. I turned to Mara. Mara, do you agree that Asterian's implementation leadership is an internal staffing matter? Mara looked at Julian. Julian looked at Mara. Evan looked at the table. Dana looked at me like I had asked whether the moon needed a purchase order. Mara said, "We can discuss client provisions separately." That was legal for absolutely not. Julian's voice hardened slightly. Nadia, this is not a negotiation. We are offering you a generous severance package. How generous? Dana brightened, happy to return to the script. 12 weeks of base salary, continued health coverage through the quarter, and executive outplacement services. I waited. That was all. I looked at Evan. He avoided my eyes. 12 weeks, I said. Dana nodded. For a senior executive transition, that is consistent with policy. It is also less than 1% of the milestone award due in 3 days. Julian sighed, not because he was tired, because he wanted to look tired of my greed. The milestone award is contingent on active employment at the time of certification. No, I said. It is contingent on operational acceptance and contribution certification. Active employment is required unless separation occurs without cause after readiness submission. Julian smiled. That was when I knew he had not read the agreement. He had read a summary, probably written by Reese, maybe by Dana, possibly by someone who thought footnotes were decorative. Nadia, Julian said, we're comfortable with our position. I'm sure you are. Dana slid a pen across the table. The sound it made was small, sharp, final if you believed in theater. But if you sign today, she said, we can preserve the narrative around your departure. It will be framed as voluntary, strategic, positive. And if I don't? Julian's expression cooled. Then the company will communicate the restructuring as it sees fit. There it was, not a threat. Corporate people rarely threaten directly. They imply weather, storm systems, unfortunate circumstances, narratives that become cloudy if you refuse to stand in the rain. I picked up the transition statement. It said I was stepping away to pursue personal opportunities. It said I supported the leadership restructuring. It said Lantern Gate was now fully institutionalized under Reese Calder. It said all client relationships, technical continuity plans, and implementation materials were complete and transferred. It said there were no unresolved compliance, revenue recognition, or client dependency issues connected to my departure. I looked up. This last paragraph is false. Dana inhaled. Julian did not. Mara closed her eyes for half a second. Evan looked physically smaller. Julian said, it is standard language. False language often is. Dana's tone sharpened. Nadia, we are not asking you to make a legal representation. This is a communications document. Mara? Mara looked at the paper, then at me, then at Julian. She should not sign language she believes is inaccurate. A beautiful sentence. Small, professional, devastating. Julian's eyes flashed. This is a routine executive departure. No, I said. This is a pre-acceptance removal of the named project custodian under the Asterian Master Implementation Agreement. The room changed, not dramatically. Nobody gasped. Nobody threw papers. This was a corporate boardroom, not a courtroom in a movie, but the air shifted. Evan froze. Mara's fingers stopped moving. Julian stared at me with the irritated confusion of a man hearing the first line of a song he should have memorized. Dana said, "The named what?" And that was when I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I placed the transition statement back on the table. "I'm going to assume nobody told you about Schedule R7. Mara's face went still. Very still. Julian turned to her. "What is Schedule R7? Mara did not answer immediately. That was not good for Julian. Lawyers answer quickly when the answer helps their client. They pause when the truth needs careful packaging. I decided to help. Schedule R7 is the project custodian continuity schedule attached to the Asterion agreement. It was added during the Second Amendment last year after Asterion's risk committee became concerned about executive interference with Lantern Gate validation." Dana looked at Julian. Julian looked at Mara. Evan whispered something under his breath that sounded expensive. I continued. "It names me as the project custodian through Phase 3 acceptance and the first 60 days of operational transfer. It does not prevent Meridian from terminating me. Companies can make their own bad decisions. But it does require a custodian handover certification signed by Asterion, Meridian's board risk chair, and the independent validation auditor before Meridian can represent the system as fully transferred." I turned to Evan. "None that it places the Asterion implementation revenue in review status if Meridian removes the custodian without certification before acceptance." Evan's face lost color. That was the 6th warning. For him. Julian sat back. "That cannot possibly be enforceable." I smiled politely. "Julian, that is a conclusion people usually reach before reading the thing they signed." Dana shifted in her seat. "The company signed this?" "Mara signed it. Evan countersigned the revenue treatment memo. Julian initialed the board disclosure summary. Reese was copied twice." Mara said softly, "The provision exists." Julian turned on her. "And you didn't flag this?" "I did," Mara said. Silence. That beautiful corporate silence again. The kind that arrives when blame enters the room and begins looking for somewhere to sit. Mara opened her tablet. "I flagged it during the April governance review, the July client risk meeting, and again in the bellwether diligence response. My recommendation was that no leadership change involving Nadia occur before Asterion acceptance unless the custodian handover package was completed." Julian stared at her. Dana's folder suddenly looked less ceremonial. Evan rubbed his forehead. I glanced at my watch. 8:41 a.m. Asterion's first automated continuity notice would land at 8:45. I had scheduled it 7 months ago. Not as revenge, as process. That is the thing about good safeguards. They do not require anger. They require maintenance. Julian leaned toward me. "Nadia, what exactly did you do?" "Nothing this morning." "Don't play games." "I'm not. This morning I came to work." His jaw tightened. "What did you set up?" I looked at Mara. "Malk, would you like to explain the continuity ledger? Or should I?" Mara did not speak, so I did. Lantern Gate's implementation governance includes a continuity ledger. Every critical transition event is recorded and distributed to authorized parties. If the project custodian is removed, restricted, locked out, or formally separated before acceptance, the system sends a custodian event notice to Meridian Legal, Meridian Finance, Asterion's Risk Committee, the independent validation auditor, and the board risk chair. Dana stared at me. "You built an automatic alert if you were fired?" "No," I said. "I built an automatic alert if the person responsible for system integrity was removed before the client signed acceptance." "That person is you?" "For now, yes." Julian's voice was low. "You embedded yourself into the client contract." "No." "Then Asterion demanded a named custodian after your commercial team tried to pressure engineering into marking incomplete validation tests as complete." Evan looked down. Mara did not deny it. Julian said, "That was a misunderstanding." "It became a signed amendment." Another silence. Then my phone buzzed. Not a call. An email preview. Subject, custodian event notice, pending distribution. The system had detected my transition meeting because HR had entered my separation status into WorkSpan before the meeting began. Of course they had. Dana had scheduled my termination before getting my signature. Careless, polished, but careless. I placed my phone face up on the table. Everyone saw the subject line. Evan whispered, "Oh, God!" Julian's eyes snapped to Dana. "What did you enter?" Dana blinked. I followed the offboarding checklist. What did you enter? Separation pending. Effective today. Mara's hand went to her forehead. A tiny movement. A professional collapse in miniature. I tapped the phone once and opened the notice. It was not dramatic. No red letters, no sirens, just clean formatting. Custodian event detected. Named Project Custodian. Nadia Vale event. Type pre-acceptance separation. Pending contract. Reference Asterian Master. Implementation agreement. Schedule. R7. Action required. Handover certification or implementation review status distribution. Window. 15 minutes. Julian stared at the screen. Stop it. It's not a bomb, Julian. It's governance. Stop the distribution. I don't control it unilaterally. You built it. With approvals. Then reverse it. I can't reverse an event that HR entered. Dana whispered, can we change the status? Mara said, do not touch anything. That was the smartest thing anyone had said all morning. Julian stood again, this time not for dominance, for panic. Nadia, we need to slow this down. I looked at the separation papers. 12 weeks of salary does tend to create urgency. He ignored that. Let's be practical. Now, we can postpone the effective date. You already entered the event. Then we correct it. You can explain the correction to Asterian, the auditor, and the board risk chair. His mouth tightened. And what will you explain? The truth. Dana jumped in. Nadia, no one is trying to take credit away from you. I looked at her. She looked away. Because that lie was too heavy, even for HR, Reese Calder's name was already on the Thursday acceptance deck. I had seen the draft. Not because I snooped, because the assistant preparing it accidentally left the version history open. Slide 4 said, Executive Lead, Reese Calder Strategic Architecture Support, Nadia Vale Support. 4 years of rebuilding a system that held together a billion-dollar transaction. And they had reduced me to support. Corporate theft rarely wears a mask. It wears tracked changes. I stood. Julian said, Where are you going? To collect my bag. We're not done. You scheduled a termination meeting. You gave me papers. I declined to sign false statements. HR triggered a contract event. I believe we covered the agenda. Mara spoke carefully. Nadia, it may be helpful if you remain available while we assess next steps. I'll be available through counsel. Dana looked alarmed. Counsel? Yes. That's the person professionals call before signing documents written by people trying not to pay them. Julian's voice sharpened. This does not need to become adversarial. It became adversarial when you tried to fire me 2 days before certification and asked me to sign away the facts. He stared at me. The mask slipped for 1 second. Underneath was not rage. It was calculation. He was not angry that he had hurt me. He was angry that the cost model had changed. I picked up the pen Dana had slid toward me and placed it neatly back beside the folder. I won't be needing this. Then I left. I did not slam the door. That would have been childish. Also, glass doors are expensive. By the way, if you enjoy stories where the most dangerous weapon in the room is a time-stamped document, go ahead and subscribe. It helps the channel, and it costs less than ignoring a client contract. Back in my office, I took my bag, my notebook, my father's photo, and a small ceramic owl my niece had made in art class. Everything else belonged to Meridian. Even the chair that had destroyed my lower back during the bellwether diligence sprint. Especially that chair. Lila at reception was standing now. She looked like she wanted to say something, but had been warned not to. I gave her a small smile. It's all right. Her eyes shone a little. No, it isn't. That nearly got me. Not Julian, not Dana, not the folder. Lila. Because Lila had been there the year my father got sick. She had watched me take calls from the hospital in conference rooms between client reviews. She had once left a soup on my desk during a week when I forgot to eat anything that did not come from a vending machine. People think companies are buildings and logos and leadership statements. They are not. They are Lila at reception. They are analysts working late because someone promised a client something impossible. They are junior engineers who learn to sleep under desks during launch week. They are operations coordinators whose names never appear on investor decks. I built Lantern Gate for them too. Because when executive ambition outruns operational truth, junior staff get crushed first. I looked back down the corridor. Through the glass boardroom wall, I could see movement now. Fast movement. Julian on the phone, Dana flipping through papers, Evan standing with both hands on the table, Mara typing like the keyboard had personally offended her. The polished panic had begun. I took the elevator down alone, 42 floors, no music. Oh, just the faint hum of descent. My phone buzzed at 8:47. Custodian event notice distributed. I stepped into the lobby just as the first call came in. Mara. I let it ring. Then Evan, then Dana. Then a number I did not recognize. Then Mara again. By the time I reached the parking garage, I had 7 missed calls. Not dramatic by internet standards, but in corporate terms, 7 missed calls in 4 minutes means someone has discovered a document with signatures. I drove to my father's old house. It was 23 minutes from Meridian's headquarters and 1,000 miles from the 42nd floor. He had left it to me when he passed. A small brick place with a crooked mailbox, a kitchen table older than half the executive team, and a backyard where the grass refused to grow evenly no matter how much I spent on landscaping. I made tea, and not coffee. Coffee was for survival. Tea was for watching consequences steep. At 9:12, my attorney called. Her name was Simone Ayers. She had the calm voice of a person who billed in 6-minute increments and enjoyed clean documentation. "Nadia," she said, "I received the separation documents. Did they actually ask you to sign the transition statement as drafted?" "Yes." A pause, then the faint sound of papers moving. "Bold. That's one word. Not the one I'd use professionally." "I declined." "Good. Did they terminate you formally?" "They said my role was eliminated. HR entered separation pending effective today." Simone exhaled softly. "Before Asterion acceptance?" "Yes." "And before board risk signed custodian handover?" "Yes." "And before the validation auditor certified operational transfer?" "Yes." Another pause. But this one had joy in it. Lawyers rarely show joy. When they do, it sounds like silence wearing a smile. Simone said, "I'll send Meridian a preservation letter." "Already?" "They moved first. We respond cleanly." "Simone?" "Yes." "I don't want chaos for the junior team." "I know." "I don't want Asterion harmed." "I know. I just want them unable to lie." "That," she said, "is usually enough." At Meridian, the morning had become a slow-motion accounting accident. I learned the details later through documents, board minutes, and one very tired finance director who resigned 3 weeks afterward and sent me a message that simply said, "You were right. Sorry it took me so long." At 8:52, Asterion's risk committee received the custodian event notice. At 8:55, their chief risk officer, Helena Stroud, forwarded it to their general counsel with the note, "Is Meridian attempting pre-acceptance leadership substitution?" 8 words, $600 million of concern. At 9:03, the independent validation auditor paused the final acceptance review. Not canceled. Paused. A beautiful, expensive word. Paused meant Asterion could not sign Phase 3 acceptance on Thursday. No acceptance meant Meridian could not recognize the implementation revenue. No revenue recognition meant Bellwether Capital had to update acquisition diligence. No updated diligence meant the Friday signing call became subject to further review. Subject to further review is corporate language for everybody sit down, something is wrong. At 9:14, Bellwether's transaction team requested clarification on key person dependency and governance continuity. At 9:22, Meridian's board risk chair, a retired insurance executive named Celeste Orman, asked Mara Fenwick one question. Who authorized this? That question traveled through the building like smoke. Julian tried to contain it. Of course he did. At 9:31, he called an emergency executive huddle. Not a board meeting, not yet, just the inner circle. Julian, Dana, Evan, Mara, Reese Calder, and 2 senior vice presidents who had the survival instincts to say very little. Reese arrived late. I know because the meeting transcript later noted it. He had been in a media prep session for the Asterion announcement. That was the part that almost made me laugh. While the governance system was alerting the client that Meridian had removed the named custodian, Reese had been practicing how to describe his leadership journey. There are many forms of corporate tragedy. One of them is rehearsing applause for a deal you just endangered. Julian opened the huddle by saying, "We have a procedural issue." Mara corrected him. "It is not procedural." He said, "Let's avoid overstatement." She said, The client agreement requires a continuity process. We triggered the review mechanism without completing the process. Reese, according to the transcript, said, "Can't we just tell them Nadia is still consulting through transition?" Mara asked, "Is she?" No one answered. Because no one had asked me. They had been too busy not paying me. Dana suggested changing the HR status from separation pending to administrative review. Mara said, "That would create a second problem." Dana asked, "What second problem?" Mara said, "A false record after notice distribution." Evan reportedly removed his glasses and whispered, "Please don't." That was Evan's role in most crises. He did not prevent bad decisions. He just whispered near them after impact. Julian asked if the continuity ledger could be overridden. Mara said only the project custodian, the validation auditor, and Asterian's risk committee could jointly override it. Reese said, "So Nadia can stop it?" Mara said, "Not alone." Reese said, "But she built it." Mara replied, "Yes, properly." I would have paid good money to hear her tone. Then Evan opened the revenue memo. The one he had countersigned. The memo explained that Asterian implementation revenue could only be recognized upon acceptance if three conditions were true. Functional deployment complete. Client acceptance signed. Out custodian continuity intact or properly transferred. Not my words. Finance's words. Written to satisfy Bellwether's diligence team. Evan had signed it because at the time it helped the acquisition valuation. That is the funny thing about truth. When it makes the company look more valuable, everyone wants it in writing. When it makes the company look liable, suddenly people wish writing had never been invented. At 10:06, Bellwether requested a call. At 10:19, Asterian requested a call. At 10:27, Celeste Orman requested all documents related to my termination. At 10:34, Mara requested that nobody delete, edit, revise, rename, relocate, or clean up any files. That last phrase came from experience. There is always one person in a corporate crisis who thinks renaming a folder from Nadia transition to leadership alignment will fool the concept of evidence. By 11 o'clock, Meridian's executive floor was no longer quiet. It was alive with controlled disaster. Slack pings, calendar invites, door closures, legal holds, finance spreadsheets reopening like graves. Reese tried to call me at 11:08. That surprised me. Not because he called, because he thought I would answer. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "Nadia, it's Reese. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Call me." There had been no misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when someone mishears a lunch order. This was a strategy, a bad one. But still. At 11:21, Dana emailed my personal address. Subject, follow-up on today's discussion. Nadia. We recognize this morning's conversation may have felt abrupt. We would welcome an opportunity to reconnect and align on a mutually constructive path forward. Please let us know if you are available today. Best, Dana may have felt abrupt. They fired me before my bonus payout, tried to make me sign a false transition statement, triggered a client contract review, and were now concerned about my feelings regarding pacing. I forwarded it to Simone. She replied with 3 words, "Do not respond." I did not respond. I watered my father's half-dead basil plant instead. At noon, Asterian joined the call with Meridian. Helena Stroud led it. Helena was not dramatic. She was worse. She was precise. She had spent 20 years in maritime insurance, which meant she could detect nonsense at nautical distance. Julian opened with reassurance, as I was not there, but I later read the summary. He said Meridian remained fully committed to successful delivery. Helena asked why the named project custodian had been placed in separation status before acceptance. Julian said the company was undergoing internal restructuring. Helena asked whether Asterian had approved a custodian transition. Julian said discussions were ongoing. Helena asked whether discussions had occurred before the separation status was entered. Julian said not formally. Helena asked whether the validation auditor had certified the handover. Mara answered that no certification had been completed. Helena asked whether Meridian had represented to Bellwether that Lantern Gate Phase 3 was ready for acceptance under stable governance. Evan answered yes. Helena asked whether that representation remained accurate. No one answered for 9 seconds. 9 seconds is a lifetime on a corporate call. It is long enough for everyone to understand the truth and nobody to volunteer to say it. Finally, Mara said, "It requires qualification." That was the second smartest thing anyone said that day. Qualification meant not yes. Not yes meant Bellwether had a problem. Bellwether's problem became Meridian's problem by 1:15 p.m. Their transaction lead, Annika Rowe, sent a formal diligence inquiry asking for all documents related to my removal, all board materials referencing custodian continuity, all revenue recognition analysis tied to Asterion, all communications involving Reese Calder and Asterion transition planning, all drafts of the Phase 3 acceptance deck. That last one mattered. Because the draft deck showed they had replaced me with Reese before telling the client, before notifying the board risk chair, before completing handover certification, and before paying my milestone award. Careless. The downfall of arrogant executives is rarely that they do not make plans. It is that they make plans in PowerPoint, and PowerPoint has version history. At 2:03 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Celeste Orman, the board risk chair. I had met Celeste only 4 times. She wore silver-framed glasses and had the unsettling habit of asking questions that made entire committees regret existing. I answered. Nadia Vale. Nadia, it's Celeste Orman. Are you represented by counsel? Yes. Then I won't discuss substance without your attorney. I'm calling for one reason. Are you safe? And have you been cut off from any system that would prevent client protection? I respected that question. Not, how do we fix this? Not, can you help us manage the optics? She asked about safety and client protection. I'm safe, I said, and the system is functioning as designed. Good. A pause. Then she added, for what it's worth, I read Schedule R7. I wish more people had. So do I. She ended the call. No flattery, no manipulation, just confirmation. That was Celeste. By 3:30, Meridian had entered the second stage of executive panic. The first stage is denial. This is when people say things like procedural, misunderstanding, and optics. The second stage is document discovery. This is when everyone suddenly remembers they wrote emails. Reese's emails were the problem. One in particular. I sent 3 weeks earlier to Julian and Dana. Subject, Nadia timing, a masterpiece of corporate self-incrimination. Reese wrote, if we wait until after Asterion acceptance, Nadia's award will be difficult to avoid and her leverage increases. Recommend transitioning her before certification and presenting me as executive lead in final deck. Legal should confirm, but I don't see client having approval rights over internal leadership. Legal should confirm. The prayer of people who did not ask legal. Mara had not been copied. Evan had not been copied. The board had not been copied. But Dana replied, fine from people's side if positioned as role elimination. Need clean statement from Nadia confirming full transfer. Julian replied, proceed? One word. $1 billion vocabulary failure. That email did more damage than the continuity ledger. The ledger showed the contract event. The email showed intent, not criminal intent. This is not that kind of story, but intent to remove me before certification, intent to avoid the award, intent to misrepresent the transition, intent to treat the client continuity provision like a decorative appendix. By 4:10, Mara had the email. By 4:22, Celeste had it. By 4:40, Bellwether had requested a delay. The acquisition signing call was postponed. Not canceled, postponed. Again, an expensive word. Meridian's stock was private, so there was no public market collapse, no dramatic ticker plunge, no news anchors, no helicopters, just worse things. Private equity silence, client distrust, board-level document review, executives suddenly speaking in complete sentences. At 5:15, Julian called me. I did not answer. At 5:16, he called again, and I did not answer. At 5:18, Simone called. I answered. Meridian wants to discuss reinstatement, she said. I looked at my father's old kitchen wall, where the paint had started to bubble near the window. They fired me 7 hours ago. They're efficient when frightened. What exactly are they offering? Interim reinstatement through Asterion acceptance, milestone award review after closing, mutual non-disparagement, and a revised transition statement. I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Milestone award review? Yes. That's adorable. I thought you'd enjoy that. What did you tell them? That any discussion begins with correcting the record, notifying Asterion that you were removed without completed handover, preserving all documents, and paying the earned award if the contractual conditions are satisfied. Did they like that? No. Good. Simone paused. Do you want the job back? I looked at the photo of my father on the counter. He had been a civil engineer, a bridge inspector, the kind of man who believed a structure did not care about your title. If the bolts were wrong, the bridge failed. He used to say, "People don't fall because gravity is cruel. They fall because someone ignored the warning signs." The year he got sick, Meridian was in crisis. Our first Asterion pilot had failed. Julian had promised the board a recovery plan. Reese had promised the client features engineering had never built. Finance had promised bellwether numbers we could not support yet, and the junior team had inherited everyone's promises. I spent 6 months rebuilding the architecture. Hospital calls at midnight, validation calls at dawn, red-eye flights with spreadsheets open on tray tables. My father once woke up during chemo, saw me reviewing risk thresholds beside his bed, and said, "If they need you that badly, make sure they can't pretend they don't." So I did. Not for revenge, for accuracy. I told Simone, "No, I don't want the job back." Then we move accordingly. The next morning, Meridian tried a softer approach. Not with me, with Asterion. They offered Reese as commercial transition lead while I remained available as needed. Asterion rejected it. Helena Stroud wrote, "A named custodian cannot be retroactively made available after unilateral removal. Please provide either certified handover materials or written confirmation that Nadia Vale retains full authority through acceptance." Full authority. Those 2 words created a beautiful problem. To fix the deal, Meridian needed me to have authority. To avoid paying me, Meridian needed me not to matter. They could not have both. Corporate arrogance often depends on contradictory beliefs. You are essential when work needs doing. You are replaceable when payment comes due. Schedule R7 forced them to choose one reality. By Wednesday afternoon, Bellwether sent Meridian a revised acquisition position. The valuation was not withdrawn, it was reduced by $118 million. That number did not come from my bonus. It came from risk. Bellwether's analysts applied a governance discount, a client dependency adjustment, and a revenue certification holdback. Finance people can make punishment sound like weather reports. The result was simple. Meridian could still close the deal, but at a lower valuation, with a larger escrow, delayed executive bonuses, and a condition that Julian Voss and Reese Calder certify all Asterion-related representations under board supervision. Julian hated that, not because it was unfair, because it required signatures. Executives who enjoy verbal confidence often dislike written accountability. At 6:40 p.m. Wednesday, Celeste called a special board meeting. This time, I attended by counsel, not as an employee, as a material witness. That phrase is cold. I liked it. The meeting was virtual, but everyone behaved like the room had walls. Julian appeared from his office. Behind him, the skyline glowed gold. He looked composed. And too composed. Reese sat beside him, slightly out of frame, as if distance could protect him from documents. Dana joined from a conference room. Mara joined from legal. Evan looked like he had slept inside a spreadsheet. Celeste chaired the meeting. She began without pleasantries. "We are here to determine how Meridian entered a pre-acceptance separation event involving the named project custodian for the Asterion implementation without completing required handover governance." No one spoke. A board member named Philip Dane said, "Julian, please walk us through the decision." Julian did what executives do when cornered. He widened the frame. He talked about restructuring, market maturity, leadership evolution, commercial alignment, operational scalability, talent optimization. By the time he finished, I had counted 11 phrases that meant absolutely nothing. Celeste let him finish. Then she said, "Why Tuesday?" Julian blinked. "I'm sorry?" Why was Nadia's role eliminated on Tuesday, 2 days before Asterion acceptance? Julian said, "The timing reflected internal planning." Celeste said, "Planning by whom?" He hesitated. "By the executive team." Mara spoke, "Not the full executive team." That landed. Celeste turned to Dana. "Were you aware of Schedule R7 before initiating the separation process?" Dana's face was pale. "I was generally aware that the Asterion contract had continuity provisions." "That was not my question." Dana swallowed. "I did not review Schedule R7 directly." Celeste turned to Evan. Were you aware? Evan closed his eyes briefly. No, yes. Did you advise against the termination? I was not included in the final timing decision. Did you advise anyone that removal before acceptance would affect revenue recognition? I had previously communicated that continuity was a condition. Previously is not Tuesday. Evan had no answer. Then Celeste turned to Reese. Mr. Calder, why was your name placed as executive lead in the acceptance deck before Asterion approved a custodian transition? Reese adjusted his camera. I understood the change to be internal. Celeste said, Based on what? Based on discussions with Julian and Dana. Did you read Schedule R7? No. Did you ask legal to confirm client approval rights? I assumed, Celeste cut him off. Did you ask legal? Reese looked at Mara. Mara looked back with the warmth of a locked filing cabinet. No, he said. Then Celeste shared the email. Subject, Nadia timing. She did not read it dramatically. She did not need to. She displayed it on screen. There is something uniquely satisfying about watching powerful people meet their own inbox. Julian's face did not change. That was impressive. Reese's did. Dana's did more. Celeste said, This appears to indicate the timing was influenced by Ms. Vale's milestone award. Julian said, That interpretation lacks context. Celeste asked, What context changes the sentence? If we wait until after Asterion acceptance, Nadia's award will be difficult to avoid. No answer. Philip Dane leaned toward his camera. Mara, is the award payable if acceptance occurs and Nadia was separated without cause after readiness submission? Mara said, Based on my initial review, yes. Why unless the company establishes cause or failure of contribution? I have seen no evidence of either. Julian said, This is premature. Celeste said, No, it is delayed. That was the third smartest thing said in the entire affair. No, it is delayed. The board understood something Julian had not. The problem was not that I had trapped the company. The problem was that the company had walked past every warning sign because the payout looked easier to avoid than the contract looked important to read. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, 3 things were clear. First, Meridian could not present Reese as executive lead without Asterion approval. Second, Meridian could not recognize the Asterion revenue until continuity was corrected. Third, the board had lost confidence in Julian's handling of the transition. They did not fire him that night. Boards rarely move dramatically when they can move procedurally. They formed a special review committee. They placed all Asterion communications under board oversight. They suspended executive transaction bonuses until closing conditions were cured. And they authorized Mara to negotiate with me through counsel. Julian's face when Celeste announced that last part was almost peaceful. Not because he accepted it. Because his soul had temporarily left the meeting. On Thursday morning, the day I was supposed to be erased from the acceptance deck, I received a call from Helena Stroud at Asterion. Simone joined. Helena was direct. Nadia, Asterion would like to complete acceptance, but not under false continuity. More, are you willing to serve as independent transition custodian for 60 days if Meridian agrees? I looked at Simone. She muted herself just long enough to say, That is leverage wearing a suit. I unmuted. I'm willing if the authority is real, the scope is written, the team is protected, and all prior work is accurately credited. Helena said, That is reasonable. Meridian did not think it was reasonable. Meridian thought it was outrageous. Then Bellwether told them it was necessary. Funny how quickly outrage becomes feasible when the buyer agrees with it. By Thursday afternoon, a new agreement was drafted. Not employment. Independent transition custodian, 60 days. Full access to Lantern Gate governance. Authority to certify handover completion. Direct reporting line to Asterion Risk Committee and Meridian Board Risk Chair. No authority over unrelated Meridian operations. No public disparagement by either side. Accurate attribution in acceptance materials. Payment of the $2.78 million milestone award upon Asterion acceptance. Consulting fee for the transition period. Reimbursement of counsel fees. And a written correction of the internal record stating my role had not been eliminated for performance reasons. Julian tried to remove the attribution paragraph. Asterion refused. He tried to delay the award until Bellwether closing. Simone refused. He tried to make my consulting authority subject to Reese Calder's approval. Helena reportedly laughed. Not a big laugh, just one short sound, the kind people make when a proposal dies immediately. Friday morning, the Asterion acceptance meeting happened, not at Meridian headquarters, or at Asterion's regional office overlooking the river port. Glass walls, steel beams, and cranes moving in the distance like slow mechanical animals. I arrived in a gray suit with my black notebook. Not because I needed the notebook, because some accessories become symbolic. Reese was there. So was Julian. Dana was not. HR people rarely attend the resurrection. Mara attended. Evan attended remotely. Helena sat across from me. The validation auditor sat beside her with a stack of reports so thick it looked like a small building code violation. The acceptance deck had been revised. Slide 4 now said, Project Custodian and Strategic Architecture Lead, Nadia Vale Commercial. Sponsor, Reese Calder Board. Risk Oversight, Celeste Orman Support had disappeared. Funny how words behave when clients are watching. I presented the final continuity report. No drama, no speech about betrayal, no revenge monologue. Just facts. Phase 3 deployment completed. Validation tests passed. Exception logs resolved. Open governance items listed. Transition requirements defined. Junior team contributions documented. Client risks acknowledged. Controls active. Helena asked 3 questions. All good ones. The auditor asked 2. Also good. Reese asked 1 question that had already been answered on slide 7. Nobody helped him. Then Helena signed. The auditor signed, Mara signed for Meridian, Celeste signed remotely for board risk. I signed last, not because I was more important, because the system required the custodian's signature after all other confirmations. The moment my DocuSign confirmation landed, LanternGate updated the status, operational acceptance, complete custodian transition, active revenue recognition condition, satisfied pending finance review. Evan, on the conference screen, looked like a man watching a locked vault reopen. Julian looked like the vault had opened onto his foot. Helena closed her folder. Thank you, Nadia. Asterion appreciates clean work. Clean work. 2 words, better than applause. After the meeting, Julian approached me near the windows. The port cranes moved behind him. He had chosen the lighting well. Executives always know where to stand when they want redemption to look cinematic. Nadia, he said, I hope you understand that none of this was personal. I looked at him. That old corporate sentence. None of this was personal. The phrase people use when they personally approve the email. I personally ignore the warning, personally sign the document, and personally expect you to absorb the loss. I said, Julian, that is the problem. He frowned. What is? You think personal is the only thing that matters. He had no answer, so I gave him one. It was structural, documented, signed, distributed. That's why it worked. I walked away. Behind me, Reese tried to speak to Helena. She was polite, briefly. Then she turned to the auditor. Reese's leadership era lasted about 36 hours and 1 revised slide. The following week, Meridian announced that Julian Voss would be taking a temporary leave during the board's governance review. Temporary leave is corporate weather again. Sometimes it clears, sometimes it becomes permanent. In Julian's case, it became permanent in 22 days. And the board cited loss of confidence in executive judgment related to client governance and transaction controls. A sentence so dry, it could start a brush fire. Reese Calder resigned 2 days after Julian. His farewell email said he was leaving to pursue advisory opportunities. I assumed those opportunities involved advising people not to put things in writing. Dana Klein stayed longer. HR usually does. But she was moved out of executive decision authority and into culture initiatives, which is where companies place people when they are not ready to fire them, but no longer trust them near consequences. Evan survived. Barely. He gave the board everything. Every memo, every revenue analysis, every ignored warning. Finance people are loyal to power until audit enters the room. Then they become loyal to chronology. Mara Fenwick became interim chief operating officer. That surprised people who did not understand what had happened. It did not surprise me. Mara had told the truth in the room when silence would have been easier. That matters. Celeste Orman became acting chair after the old chair stepped back from transaction oversight. Bellwether still closed the investment, at a reduced valuation, with a larger governance escrow, with Julian's transaction bonus canceled, with Reese's retention award forfeited, with Meridian required to implement board-level controls around key person-client commitments. and with my consulting agreement attached as a closing condition. I did not become rich in the cartoon way people imagine. There was no private island, no sports car, no champagne poured over a stack of legal documents. I received the milestone award I had earned. I received my consulting fees. I paid Simone. I paid off the medical debt from my father's last year. I funded a scholarship in his name for engineering students who wanted to work in infrastructure safety. And I took 3 weeks off, real weeks. No laptop, no investor calls, no midnight validation reviews, no executives saying quick question before asking for 10 hours of labor. On the first Monday of my break, I sat in my father's backyard with tea and watched a contractor repair the crooked fence. My phone rang. Asterion. Helena Stroud. I answered. Nadia, she said, we're building an internal risk governance office. I want you to design it. As a vendor? As chief architecture officer if you're interested. I looked at the basil plant. Still half dead. Still trying. What happened to taking time off? Simone asked when I told her later. I can take time off with better benefits. The offer was good. Better than Meridian. More authority. Cleaner governance. A board that had already seen what happened when client continuity was treated like an HR scheduling problem. I accepted after negotiating 2 things. First, no executive could override a risk integrity control without written board notice. Second, junior staff could escalate validation concerns directly to governance without manager approval. Helena agreed immediately. That was when I knew I had chosen correctly. At Meridian, people still told the story. Not publicly, not in official documents, but companies have oral histories. Whispered warnings passed from analyst to associate to new manager. Do not rush termination before certification. Do not ignore schedule attachments. Do not let Reese near a deck. And most importantly, read what Nadia wrote. The funny thing is, I never wanted revenge. Not the messy kind, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that burns everything down just to feel warm for a minute. I wanted the truth to remain attached to the work. I wanted the people who built the system to be seen. I wanted the client protected. I wanted the company to experience the consequences it had already agreed to in writing. That is the cleanest form of corporate justice. Not sabotage, not threats, not screaming in a boardroom. Just a document doing exactly what everyone signed it to do. Months later, Celeste sent me a handwritten note. Actual paper. Board members love paper when they want sincerity to feel expensive. It said, Nadia, you did not create the crisis. You created the control that revealed it. There is a difference. COI framed it. Not because I needed validation, because it was true. People confuse exposure with damage. They blame the alarm for the fire. They blame the audit for the fraud. They blame the contract for the consequence. But the clause did not betray Meridian. The ledger did not embarrass Julian. The continuity notice did not cost them $118 million. Their own choices did. Their shortcuts, their arrogance, their belief that a person can be essential on Monday, disposable on Tuesday, and erased by Thursday if the slide deck is pretty enough. They fired me before my bonus payout because they thought the contract was about money. It wasn't. It was about continuity. And the moment they removed me, the clause did exactly what it was built to do. It remembered. If this story kept you watching, like the video and subscribe for more sharp, fictional corporate revenge stories where the quietest person in the room usually has the strongest paper trail.